Cool. So I'm not sure if parallel play is a thing that converts into other languages, but if you have little kids, parallel play is when they're basically playing near each other but not necessarily doing the same thing. So that was kind of what I meant by parallel play. And Stig, what we did last week, I know you mentioned you hadn't been here for a bit, was we went through the board that we have in the Open Infra Labs GitLab, and sort of began assigning epics and tasks to people.
Morning, Michael.
Good morning.
I say good morning to Michael because you're the big face on my screen right now. I see everyone else too. Hello. I'm going to hijack for the meeting for a second, Michael, and let you know that it looks like we have finally had a successful OpenShift install.
Hooray!
Yeah.
That's awesome. I specifically didn't include a CNV update this week because I figured it might be the same as last week, but I'm glad.
It seems like we're in better shape. We've worked around a whole bunch of stuff, but it seems to be going. I do see that occasionally during the installs, the servers are like hard crashing in the BIOS. Like they're throwing up a weird BIOS crash message. So that happened, it's happened twice over the past like 7 days. So it's not happening all the time, but it's weird.
Cool. Well, not cool, but cool that we're finding stuff.
Yeah. The hazards of reusing old lab hardware.
Yes. Give me 1 second. I'm fighting to get GitLab started. So welcome to Open Infrastructure, the parallel play version. What we did last week, one of the big things we did last week was we went through the GitLab board and we, to the best of our ability, assigned people to own certain stories. And we have a goal of by basically July 1st, having those fleshed out a bit because there's an opportunity to provide feedback to a bunch of the Red Hat engineers who work upstream about what we would like to see, which we hope will have the ability to impact some of the decision making that goes on upstream. And so for this week, the goal was really for us to spend a little time, since everybody's calendars are crazy, the goal was really to spend a little bit of time just sort of saying, okay, let's spend an hour and we'll just work on the stories that we're associated with. And there are people on the call that you can sort of go, hey, wait, I need a little bit of input on this. So it's an attempt to do what we might do if we had a group meeting room where we were all in the same place. In theory, we have this concept of breakout rooms. So I'm going to see if there's a way that I can enable everybody to do breakout rooms. I don't know, I've never used them before. But everybody can share a screen at least. If there are people who sort of say, hey, I want to go off and work on this with this other person, then I at least think I can create breakout rooms with people in them. So the other stuff I think I largely included in the notes or in the mail that I sent out last night. One other area that would be really, really wonderfully helpful is future topics people want to talk about. That'll help decrease I said, oh no, that's actually not the word I use. It's usually something a little with 4 letters. And usually Bill's on the phone with me at the same time, hearing me go, oh God, what are we going to do this week, Bill? So that way maybe we can get more of what you guys want to see and less of what we think you want to see. So I think I'm just looking at the notes I sent out. I think that's everything. Was there anything anybody wanted to talk about before we pull up the GitLab board?
No. Did you want to stick the GitLab URL in chat, or was it there in the meeting invite?
I better put it in chat. Give me a sec to get to the right one. Or if you have it up already.
I don't. I was just going to go get to it, and I was hoping that you made it easy for me.
Not yet, but I will in a second.
Put it in the chat.
There we go. Oh, look at Matthias was on top of it.
Thanks, Matthias. I want to be in his breakout room.
I will be right back.
Thanks, Devad. So I can share that if it's helpful. I guess I will, and unless. Share. Heidi, it is nice to see you here. I know this time has not worked for you most weeks, but if you want to take a second and introduce yourself, because I think most of us have introduced ourselves, and we can catch you up on who people are. Or did we lose Heidi? Oh, she may have dropped off. Okay. Anyway, so the glossary had Bill and I associated with it. Integration with Exceed. I don't think we actually assigned that one. I thought we had. Justin and Augustine, it sort of feels like you guys might be the right people to work with Scott and Wayne and such.
Yes, though it's a little early for that, I think.
Okay.
Certainly July 1st.
And that's fine. It's really more so that we know who to talk to later. And we can drop a note into the effect that says this is probably early.
I also think that I'm not quite sure exactly what the scope of being in one of these is establish an architecture for NERC. I wonder if either Justin or I should be.
Absolutely. That was an initial I'll get down to that one in half a sec. HIPAA compliant lab stack. Hey, come back.
Hey, Michael, how does HIPAA compliant OI lab stack differ from identify HIPAA compliant versions of Kubernetes and OpenShift? Oh, I see. One's a user story. That's why, I guess.
Yeah.
I see. We're looking at both here.
I thought we had assigned people to that too. So I'm going to quickly try and do that.
You could assign me.
Who else has an interest in that one? I hear the sounds of people who've been through HIPAA compliance before. So the establish an architecture for the NERC. Whoop, come back here. I keep getting this lovely thing that says an error has occurred in the board, which is probably not the thing we want to see. Augustine. Justin, I thought you were on this board. Do you recall your GitLab ID?
I'm not. I'm new to GitLab, so I think as soon as I looked at this board was the first time I created an account. So I'll have to get back to you.
Oh, okay. If you do there's an option to do a request, or if you drop your GitLab ID in the Zoom chat, then Lars or I or a couple of other folks will see it and approve you right away. Okay, so are there subgroups of people who want to talk about some of these that we should put into breakout rooms? Is that a helpful thing for people?
Do we have the necessary granular, like what's our goal right now? Because most of these are fairly high level. And
so I think that in most of them, we do not in fact have very much written at all about what the scope of it is. And so the goal is actually to address that exact point, Larsh.
Okay.
To
So
write, to sort of write out what we think the epic, what the group of people who are associated with it think the epic should cover, and then
Okay.
stories potentially associated with it.
do you just want to walk through them with the group then?
We can absolutely do that.
Let's do that right now.
Okay, so let me. The glossary is a fairly straightforward one, and it may be not needed because it may be that we end up sticking them into each of the associated epics. But the idea here was central place to agreement on terms, e.g. notification versus alerts. So if Bill and I were to go off and work on this now, in the ideal world, we would actually edit this and start fleshing out all the different words that
Sure.
come up in other epics. I don't know that this is one that requires a lot of thought, so I'm gonna basically ignore it for now and jump to the next one.
So Michael, I've also, I don't, oh, yeah, maybe that, never mind. What you're doing is better. Forget it.
Okay, if folks have a,
No, never mind. I was just gonna, not important. It wasn't even procedural. It was just a way of limiting the issues view, but you're looking at the board view, which is better anyway.
okay, so just as a side note, in general, I think I said this in the note last night. Like if people see a better or more efficient way to do stuff, call it out. I have no ego involvement. I'm just happy to do things better. And if others want to steer, I'm happy to hand over the wheel.
It's great when the Buddha is your project leader.
Lao Tzu said, "He who leads the best is the one who, what is it? The leader appears to do nothing, but everything gets done." I haven't.
A common complaint from workers, Michael.
I have yet to figure out how to get it to occur.
Right?
Integration with Exceed. Come on. I clicked on you. I'm afraid if I click a second time, it won't work. There we go. This is just literally something I knew we're going to have to do. And Justin and Augustine, it may, I don't know if you guys know more about it at this point, or if it's something that we can even, the obvious first step would be drop a link in.
So I guess I have, one of my questions about what does integration mean? Does that mean supporting some kind of federated authentication and that's it, or is there more to it?
And I don't know if Justin and Augustine know enough about it to answer.
Does it include XDMod, kind of usage accounting?
No, this is not XDMod, this is Exceed.
This is, first of all, this is a ways off. I can tell you from past experience when we used to have integration with Exceed that we in the past had done our batch scheduling system hooked into Exceed to where they could spill over jobs there.
I see.
And use things like CVM FS for the data and things like that. So
sorry, Justin, you're dropping off.
Integration with Exceed. I mean, yeah, sorry.
Okay. But that answers a little bit. So the goal is actually to link up these resources to Exceed's scheduling mechanisms and whatnot, so that people making use of Exceeds can schedule jobs across the NERC architecture.
I think that's a piece of it. I've also
as to what this is referring to.
Okay.
I've also heard Scott and Wayne talk about a reporting mechanism that flows out of this, but I'm not sure if I'm confusing that with XDMod. It's certainly possible I am.
That's XDMod. I think you're conflating XDMod and Exceed.
Okay.
Maybe we could get something in there to let people know what Exceed is, because I'm not really familiar with it either. You know, is it something that describes what it is?
Yeah, I was just gonna go see if I could find one quickly.
Okay.
Although if anybody has a link that they can drop in the chat, I'll just throw it in there. I don't actually know if this version allows people to edit other people's comments. I've never tried that. So
I have one more question. Why do we need to integrate with Exceed or Xdmod? Like the why hasn't been answered. I don't know. What is it that it provides that other monitoring systems that we haven't even looked at yet?
So first of all, Xseed's not a monitoring system, and let's drop Xdmod from this discussion right now because it's just going to confuse the issue. So I think the question, why do we need to integrate with Exceed, is a good one. Is that just because we want to, so that we can take advantage of other resources provided through Exceed, or is it because we want to be nice and offer resources to people? Like, what's the motivation for this particular epic? Listen to the sound of silence.
Justin or Augustine, do you guys have visibility into that, or is that a we need to pull from Scott and Wayne? It's sort of been on their hit list, but I'm not sure if I have all the reasons why.
I assume you're just looking for federated authentication, aren't you? Is that right?
No, they're looking for integration with Exceed scheduling mechanisms.
I think federated authentication would be independent of integration with Exceed.
Right.
I think it's probably a question for Wayne and Scott.
Okay.
It's just a strategic goal.
I think it may have to do with some NSF funded issues as well, if memory serves.
Yeah, they also have a OpenStack environment as well, and I think there are some interest in federating resources in general, but I don't have the details of what the if there are any specific goals or more specific ideas.
I am going to attempt to add something to my to-do list, which I've never done before. No, I'm not going to do it now. Yeah, hopefully I didn't just lose everything I typed. So the thing I wanted to add to my to-do list that I will add to my other to-do list is invite Scott and Wayne to this so that they can actually weigh in on it. Are there, and Stig, this may be a question for you, are there non-NSF or functional equivalent things to Exceed in the EU or in the UK that we should be aware of as potential?
In terms of job scheduling, I'm not sure about that. Certainly the frameworks that I'm thinking of in terms of creating looser federations, the EGI, the European Grid Initiative, is one of those, and that actually enables scientists from universities across Europe to authenticate as guest users on each other's infrastructure, where permitted. It's quite a nice example of federated authentication with OpenStack in operation at the moment. But I don't know about the job the sort of this job scheduling process and how that I can't think of other examples of that. Oh, actually I can. There's one called Phoenix with an F, F-E-N-I-X, and I believe that is a project that's going between 5 major HPC centers across Europe. But I believe that is currently in the sort of the prototyping phase. So they're probably in a similar kind of stage to you guys. But they're looking at how they can create federations and schedulings between their different HPC centers.
Okay, cool. So this the way well, let me back up. Instead of saying the way I've been thinking about this, maybe I should let other people talk about what they've been thinking about this, because I know at least Lars has probably spent a little time thinking about it.
Well, that's very optimistic of you.
I can certainly say what I think people are thinking, but
so I mean, I assume that what we're saying here is that we have partners who are interested in deploying medical related applications on this cluster, and because of that, they require HIPAA compliant storage in order to meet the necessary regulatory requirements for that particular market.
HIPAA complaint storage. I think it's HIPAA compliant storage and HIPAA compliant compute as well. I think that there are requirements around the compute as well. And so that's conceivably two different ethics.
Is that also going to have consequences for the telemetry? I mean, do you need to be firstly looking at, I guess, security posture for the telemetry and that kind of stuff? Or?
I think that's exactly the kind of stuff that we need to capture. The way we've been thinking about it is, hey, there's a group of people at one of the local hospitals, and there's a security officer for the university and one of the medical centers locally who can come to agreement about the sorts of rules we need. And there's a belief, and I don't know if it's a realistic belief, that if we understand the requirements for telemetry and monitoring associated with HIPAA, we can back off that for the non-HIPAA instances. But if you want to say more, because the fact that you asked the question implies that you know a little bit more about it perhaps than the rest of us, jump in.
I just know that it's an interesting problem. So I guess that there are some nice examples out there of OpenStack environments performing sort of medical or bioinformatic research using sensitive data sets. And some of the ones that I'm aware of, they use tools like, there's one called Wazoo, which is a derivation of OSSec, but they provide this essentially as a service to the VMs running on their systems. But it also is something that I think Wazoo with A. W-A-Z-U-H.
Z-U-H, okay.
Yeah. But this is the kind of thing where the telemetry gets, or the monitoring infrastructure gets a little bit more involved. It's that there's an interesting question, which is, do you want to be able to monitor the tenants in that kind of intrusive way? And is that actually valid for sort of essentially normally private research computing infrastructures? I know that there was a paper from the NSA recently about cloud exploits. And one of the things that they talked about was trying to keep the off-host logging out of reach of any compromised VMs, in which case kind of having the log shipping infrastructure, push it to somewhere behind an API wall is quite useful, and not having it local within the tenancy. That seems like against their advice.
Right, and actually I have a question about this. If we are looking at HIPAA compliance, does that limit what kind of logging or metrics we can collect? And
yeah, there's like a taint, isn't there?
Yeah, and more importantly,
have to be HIPAA compliant then, or...
Right, and more importantly, I mean, I see the advantages of having like the logging and metrics be not part of the tenant, but does then that impose HIPAA compliant storage requirements on the logging and metrics associated with this environment, or does it make more sense to have it all hosted within the same kind of bubble because it all has the same storage requirements? You know, if I'm gathering logs from a HIPAA compliant environment, does my log storage have to meet specific regulatory requirements?
I would think it'd be more that you probably have to know what's being logged, you know. And
sure. Yeah.
So if things that are sensitive aren't being logged, I don't know that it would be an issue. but I think it's more, what's being captured.
Sure.
But I don't know.
Yeah,
I think also there's an upstairs and downstairs component to this.
Yeah.
So I kind of jumped in upstairs here in that we're talking about monitoring of workloads, VMs, the sort of the upstairs environment in a sensitive research computing platform. But in order to provide that kind of infrastructure, I think you have to meet certain requirements in terms of how you operate the infrastructure as well. Those can be quite onerous. There's do you guys have ISO 27001? You heard about this? It's a sort of it's a set of sort of admin procedures that you have to. It's 27001, and it's about how do we maintain, like, what do we do in terms of security responses, and how do we ensure that the infrastructure meets the requirements of the workloads that we commit to take on. It's quite an undertaking to be able to do that. I wouldn't want to start doing that unless you absolutely have to.
So in the case of the HIPAA compliance, at least initially for the NERC, so let me back up. At least initially what's being envisioned is a separate cage for the hardware for, in this case, Boston. The prototype project that we're talking about is something with Boston Children's Hospital, which is a large children's hospital in the Boston area. They would have a separate cage that is in a HIPAA compliant environment with minimal access. But that level of thinking, I think, has been done pretty clearly. The next level feels like these sorts of questions. And what I captured as a potential, I grab it here, as a potential future topic was, if we can come up with a set of these kinds of questions, we can actually make arrangements for one of these meetings to ask one of the security officers to join us, and they might be able to give us more insight. HIPAA is an interesting one in that, I know I'm being recorded, but I'll say this anyway. My experience with HIPAA was it had less to do with actual security and more to do with hitting the dots.
Right.
The dots and crossing the T's. Which is always fascinating to me when we start talking to some of the professors about it, because they look at it as a problem to be solved, and the people actually doing HIPAA compliance look at it differently. That said, I think we also need to, like there are other security regimes we would love to see this used with that I believe will have much more stringent security-focused requirements. Is there more we can capture in this set of notes to help guide us when we come back to look at it? And other than Larsh and I, are there other people who are interested in participating in the EPIC writing?
It's something I'm interested in tracking. I'm not sure I can contribute much. I'm going to paste a link into the chat for a useful paper on secure research computing environments, which might be helpful.
Cool. So I will add you as I don't have a way to add you as an interested, but I'll add you anyway, and because you've already contributed an awful lot to this discussion. So we won't necessarily. Oh, I thought you were on this. Did I not? So Stig, if you can do the same thing, either let us know your GitLab and we'll add you, or just request access.
Sure, will do.
The notification epic, I think we took some notes on last week. I haven't updated the top to match the notes of that discussion. But are there other things we want to talk about? A useful thing as a side note for including in the epics is sort of the personas that we think of associated with it. So for HIPAA compliance, some obvious personas would be users of the system, but also the operators of the system, the data center, security auditors. It's useful thinking about the personas because it starts to flesh out stories that you may want to write. The goal, I don't know how many folks have been involved in writing epics and stories, so I'm just at a really high level saying the goal is not to write the stories in lieu of actually writing the code. The goal is to write enough info so that when you look at this later and you look at the stories later, you'll be able to go, oh yeah, I remember this, and I believe I know what code to write based on it. So unless there's other stuff people wanted to add to this one, I'm gonna move on to the next one. I have not yet identified a UI that lets me just jump to the next one, but maybe it's something like this. Oh no, that's a story. Oh no, that's the one we just looked at. So that. Okay, so that didn't...
Michael, I think the API is open links in a new tab.
Okay, that's a good UI to try. Hopefully that means you're leaving a message. Interactions with XDMod. Hey, that worked well. Thanks, Lars. I'm going to drop the link for XDMod in here. Augustine and Justin, this may be an area that you guys can say more about.
So XDMod is a tool that currently we use to break down what is the resource utilization. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
What is the resource utilization of users on our cluster? And so this is something that we're looking to get integrated with OpenStack. It looks like there's been some work done already with that. I pasted the link in chat, which talks about how you can get sort of OpenStack metrics. So the idea is to play with that and build on, either contribute or report issues and try and get that integration even better. But that's sort of, whenever we log into XDMod, we have a nice dashboard view of who are all of the PIs and researchers using the cluster and what is their group's usage.
Is XDMod map the UI part of XDMod? In other words, I know there's a UI part that sort of runs within a browser as well. Or am I conflating a different?
XDMod is a web application.
Okay, and it also includes. So when I log on to the BU shared computing cluster, there's a UI that allows me to do a whole host of different things above and beyond.
No, that's not XDMod.
Okay, which is that?
The BU one, that's something that we maintain in-house.
Oh, there was a new one. I'll pull the mail out. I got a note to look at something.
You might be thinking of, if it's for like interactive use of the cluster, it might be something like Open On Demand.
Thank you. It's Open On Demand, and my brain, because I learned about all three at the same time, my brain has conflated Open On Demand, XDMod, and Exceed.
Yeah, that's something else completely. That's a just an interface to the cluster.
Okay. So that's probably a high-level epic that I'm assuming I think we're gonna want to tie in the UI to that for onboarding and such. So that'll be a separate thing to add. Isn't it also the case for the why on this? It's beyond just the use that you guys are seeing for it. I believe that there's also now a requirement one of these has a, I think that the XDMod has a requirement, or maybe it was the Exceed that has a requirement around that the NFS is putting on centers to use it as a reporting mechanism. Is that ringing any bells for you guys?
That may or may not be the case. I know we just have general interest in it because,
Okay.
right, just for sort of a showback sort of mechanism, it could be useful for that.
Okay. Is this, do you guys have any time frame associated with this at this point?
No, I mean, in terms of actually having things on the ground to where we could be experimenting with that, at least on our end, for the NERD project, we're looking at about the end of this month before we actually start working closely with Red Hat consultants on the best way to go about this whole deployment anyway. So, I mean, if folks have spare cycles to experiment with XDMod and the integration with OpenStack, that's awesome.
Stig, are there any?
No, we're a ways out from putting our.
Okay. Stig, I apologize for hitting you up on all the non-US stuff, but my sense is that that's an area you have a lot of expertise in. If not, tell me. But are there other ones we should be tracking for European or?
So the federated resource accounting that I've seen before is a project called APEL, APEL, and there's an OpenStack connection for that called CASO, C-A-S-O, and these are both part of the grid process and the grid project within the EU. So they produce a very similar kind of deal, really, to XDMod, in that you can get in one dashboard kind of the resource utilization of like local HPC, Slurm environments, and the cloud infrastructure as well. So it's quite a nice framework, and it works pretty well. But I'm aware of XDMod, and I think that they produce the same kind of level of capability.
Cool. Bum, 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 bum. Marcel, if it's all right with you, I'm going to tackle this one last because I know you put a bunch of stuff in there and I suspect there's going to be a lot of discussion about it. And I think the other two are going to be relatively quick ones.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool. So this was sort of our initial, hey, what the heck are we doing in this meeting? And I am not. Ha.
I guess someone really wants to reach you this morning, Michael.
Different people. We have an air conditioner in our attic that is unhappy, and so it's cold. It's relatively nice right now, but it's going to be in the high 80s tomorrow. So I'm hopeful that one of them left me a message. This one, without life here, I'm not sure I want to tackle taking it apart, but I think that.
Agreed, but I mean, so the other thing is that with some of the discussions recently, Michael, about pivoting on the mock architecture, life may just bail because as he doesn't, OpenShift monitoring is not his thing, and he's not really part of that work. And so when I was talking to him yesterday, he was like, "Well, if you go that direction, I'm all done here."
Okay. And the context for that, folks, is in as part of the discussion about possibly dealing with the HIPAA compliance thing. There is some as yet unresolved discussion about whether we want to try and use containers first. And since it's not real at this point, it doesn't make a lot of sense to go into in-depth discussion here.
Yeah, I would punt on this one right now.
It was working so well until I apparently did something wrong. Let me get back to the board. Let's try that again. Open a new tab. Okay. I think this we've talked about a fair bit. There's a lot of notes in it, at least.
And honestly, this one is a little bit in the same situation as the one we were just looking at also, is that and the basic idea that the big picture is kind of in flux right now.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the first step there.
So before we dive into operational data available to the open source community in greater depth, are there any ones that people wanted to try and use a breakout room to talk more about separately from that? In other words, is this an area that not everybody has interest in? I'm going to wait another count to 10.
So I would like to ask about those two issues that we decided not to proceed right now. What are we waiting for? What we need to accomplish in order to start working on them?
So, sorry, you go ahead, Michael.
I think that what's happening is there's some discussions going on between the folks who are involved in the MOC, the folks who are involved in the NERC at a more senior level. Those guys probably want to talk to Justin and Augustine and get their thoughts. There's research going on to figure out. A lot of this is being driven by COVID and the HIPAA compliance question. And so there's questions that are going to experts within Red Hat and within the larger community about can we do certain things? So for example, if we were to do shift on bare metal in a HIPAA compliant way, do we have access to GPUs?
So the big picture question is, are we deploying OpenStack or are we doing just OpenShift? And that's kind of the big question, and it's got all of these components in it.
Yeah.
And the things feeding into that, Ilana, are things like how mature does Red Hat consider things like shift on bare metal? Is Red Hat willing to support that and say, yes, we think this is the way to go? Or if people are saying not mature as a product yet, things like that are what's influencing this decision and what people are trying to look into right now.
Yeah. Because the other issues, I feeling like this is going to be on top of the cluster that we're going to create. So as I see it, only the HIPAA part is related to understanding the structure of the architect for this environment.
Well, the structure of the monitoring environment, for example, is going to be tied very tightly to this, because if we're deploying OpenStack, then we would be looking seriously at the STF framework that Leif Madsen has been working on, which is primarily targeted at gathering events and metrics from an OpenStack deployment. But if we don't do that, that whole discussion changes dramatically. And that's, for example, that's why that is really dependent upon these major architectural decisions.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so unless there is an interest in doing breakouts on the other ones, I'm going to jump into this one. So there's actually a lot, at a really high level, the goal here is how do we make the operational data available to the open source community? And I mean, actually, I'm going to pause. Marcel, you may want to drive this discussion because clearly it's an area that you've been thinking a lot about. I can weigh in on some of the aspects around how we're going to bring it to the universities to get approval for sharing and that kind of stuff. And the stuff you put in there last week is going to help with it, help drive that. But it feels like you might be a better person to drive this discussion than I.
Yeah. So I think once we have some setup and some data, then we need to work with the people that produce the data. Or if we start NERC on the premise that some of the data that we generate there will be under this or that license, then we have the data basically available under a certain license. And let me Google for the Linux Foundation has a recent license for data created. Linux Foundation open data license. So if you Google for Linux CDLA.io community data license agreement, that's the newest equivalent of GPL but to data. So either we work with producing some EULA, EULRA, when you sign up for running workloads on certain parts of the NERC, then, for example, your logging data or your monitoring data will be released under this community data license agreement, which would be something that we can do up front. Didn't we have an email thread with some Red Hat legal people at some point?
We did, and we went back to the university lawyers who said they don't actually initially view this as an end user license agreement issue. They view it as a potential research review board issue. In other words, we have to bring it potentially to a review board and say, okay, here's what we want to do. Here's what already goes on in the HPC space. What sort of things do we need to do around it? So within the university and within consortiums within the university, there already exist agreements that can be signed on to share data. And so the question is, if we want to do it this widely, are there any concerns that they have? And that was why the guidance we got initially was, let's look at the data that we're collecting so that they have a thing to respond to.
Yeah. And that actually makes more sense to me as well, so that we don't talk about stuff that nobody actually knows how it looks like. So I would do, again, a really hands-on approach, wait until we have something up and running, and then start with the data that we already gathering, and that's Prometheus monitoring data. That's super easy to collect. It's super easy to offload and archive, and we already have some use cases for it, and then bring it to this board, or whoever lawyer feels inclined to read through that data and slap an open source license on it.
Yep. Okay. I don't know if there's more about this that we can do at this point other than is it well, okay, so let me pause because it's 9:51. or depending on the time zone you're in, we have 9 minutes left. Ilana, I didn't know if you had any questions or anything that you wanted to get insight into from this group before next week, but I wanted to offer you that opportunity if you did.
Yes, so as Michael asked me, next week I will present my document about the mainly OpenShift monitoring stack and login stack. I will try to cover all the components and a little bit about the installation and all of those. But if you would like me to research another area and to present it, so please raise it, and I will do my best and try to show everything that I know. You can message me in private. I don't know.
Are there other agenda or future topics people want to make sure we talk about, or that we get on a list to talk about? I grabbed one, which was, hey, if we can come up with a set of questions that we have around the HIPAA compliance and monitoring and get them to the security officers in advance, we can probably ask one or more of them to join us for discussions about HIPAA when it makes sense to. But are there other things like that?
No. So time frame wise, is it still the case that we get the CNV thing with Large and an MOC up running first, and then next we'll work on bringing up the clusters for NERC? And do we have like a rough timeline for that? Or is that too rough for me?
So
I don't think we really have a timeline for the NERC work at this point. I think there may be some goals there though, Michael.
Yeah, I think Justin alluded earlier to the fact that there's an expectation that what is it, Justin, a week or two out, we're going to start a process with the folks from Red Hat Consulting that I think is a multi-day process.
That's sort of like a week-long workshop with folks. I mean, this is just my understanding of it, right? These are Red Hat folks who do sort of OpenStack installations for bigger clients.
Right.
And so they're supposed to sort of consult with us and give us sort of a workshop about their recommended practices for deployment. I believe this is all centered around OpenStack though.
Yes, it is.
So the whole OpenShift thing. Sorry, go ahead, Laura.
No, I was just going to say that both this work and Life's monitoring work and other things are really kind of hinged tightly to this whole decision about OpenStack versus OpenShift. And like that whole consulting engagement would be wasted effort if we decide ultimately not to go with an OpenStack deployment. And so that's something we need to figure out
exactly
soon, because we're burning money and I think goodwill if we do it and then throw it out.
Yeah. As far as I had known, as far as I was aware, we had settled on OpenStack. It seems like maybe OpenShift has sort of come back into the discussion because of this HIPAA thing. So I'm myself, I'm not exactly clear on from my understanding, the original game plan was let's go with OpenStack because that's sort of a known entity and
right.
Be a stable thing and a wise choice to make as a first step foundational thing.
You're not wrong.
So unless that's changed drastically,
yeah,
I don't see why we wouldn't incubate an OpenShift thing first versus just going with that as the first thing, because it seems very very fresh. Like the shrink wrap has just been taken off and it's got a lot of bells and whistles, but I'm not sure it's really been put through that everybody really has the experiences with it that are necessary to make it really a stable platform yet. I could be wrong about that. I don't know.
I think that an important quote from both Scott and Wayne was
in like 2 minutes.
Was we're not moving forward on OpenShift unless the team, meaning you guys, are on board.
Michael, I have to drop right now because my son's graduation is happening. So
Congratulations.
Oh yeah,
this is eighth grade graduation, moving to high school, but still. All right.
It's a better cause. Have fun.
Important.
Right.
Yeah, there you go.
See you, folks.
Bye, Lars.
So if we're going with OpenStack, and then after that consulting engagement, is it basically that just somebody needs to say, now we have hardware, let's go and install the stuff, or do we still need to go through some other
I mean, we're even
hoops?
farther. We have some hardware now. I don't know that it's the final resting place we would want this whole system to live on. And I apologize, my son is frantically making noise in the background this entire time. But so yeah, so anyhow, so we have hardware. It's really more, and we've even begun playing with things like O to do an OpenStack deployment. There have been other things, other projects related to COVID-19 and bringing people back on campus that have completely derailed that work in the last month. But that being said, right, like it's just a matter of picking a direction. Like I said, I think I was under the impression that we had all sort of settled on OpenStack. It seems like a lot of folks are really excited, especially on the Red Hat side, excited about OpenShift and the container native virtualization and going that route. It just feels very, feels like, you know, maybe the next steps that they're wanting to sort of converge that platform. I think it feels like that ultimately. But I'm not sure that it's wise to do that now.
It's probably important to note that I think that the push is not, in this case, was not coming from Red Hat. It was coming from other places.
Yeah.
Because I think they feel similarly about CND and OpenShift.
My gut feel is that it's really cool stuff. I think we ultimately want to get there. I'm just not sure it's wise to build something production on.
As far as I remember, somebody said, "Oh, we need VMs, and we can't live without VMs." So that's basically the choice for OpenStack. And to be honest, I frankly don't really care from the AI ops perspective. I'm a big fan of just creating facts. And if somebody's not happy with having OpenStack, then he should bring up efforts to do OpenStack on bare metal, or OpenShift on bare metal, or OpenShift on OpenStack or something. So what I'm saying is, if we have hardware already, we could already start with the PSI team to try out their OpenStack installation scripts, or somebody else to just point it to that hardware and get this ball rolling, because that's ultimately how we get the engineers in place. So it sounds like if we have that consulting engagement next week and we have an outcome of a slew of documents out of this, then we can go to some of the Red Hat internal OpenStack installation masters and say, let's install something in a repeatable fashion pointed to that hardware.
Right, and I think that's what
we are in the middle of right now.
Okay, cool.
So, and I can tell you, I haven't checked in a little bit. Like I said, I've been pulled off onto another project, unfortunately, and I'm just now sort of starting to get some breathing room to start coming back to NERC. But the last I had checked, right, it's sort of Red Hat getting everything in order on their side to be allowed to meet with us and do this whole thing. So we're really just waiting on that. Myself and Augustine have been marching forward with learning OOO and practicing bare metal deployments on that. So it's not as if nothing's going on. It's more of just, you know, the OOO deployment that we're playing with is a very basic one that Lars helped us with, like, to get started with, and not necessarily, you know, robust enough to be the absolute end product of, you know, way that we want to go about deploying this. And the other thing is when we talk to Red Hat, right, like, they've got some complete other mechanism for deploying it that is not just OOO. So we've had a lot of issues of settling on what is the right way to go about deploying this. What are folks using as far as configuration management, driving this and doing the provisioning and all of that, right? What are those things? So like I said, OOO is the only thing that's really tangible right now that we are playing with real hardware as we speak. And we're sort of waiting for guidance from Red Hat in terms of what is the best way to go about getting OpenStack on this system and setup. So a little bit of a waiting game in terms of meeting with the right experts on that side and getting their feedback.
And I guess that's exactly why we have all the discussions going on GitLab, that we can involve all the multitude of engineers who have an opinion on how to install OpenStack. I mean, Triple O is not the only installer. I think there are more OpenStack installers than components in OpenStack.
I would agree with that.
So that obviously we need to tear it down and install it again, so that we may have that as a repeatable fashion. But good. So we have hardware. That's great.
Yeah, so I mean, right now we have basic hardware. I mean, as far as the NERC side, when I say NERC, I'm thinking, the Harvard side where I'm sitting. We have some basic test gear that's in place, but we also have a lot of I don't want to say old compute because it's not old and crufty, but older for us compute that basically can just be pulled over and used. So once we figure out a good mechanism for doing this, we've settled on something in the architecture and how we're going to go about rolling this out, we have additional hardware that we can layer on for compute on the hypervisor side.
Cool.
So there's all these other things that we're talking about with in these sort of epics and stories of these various different integrations with things like Globus authentication, XD mod was a big one in our discussions, and then lots of other ideas on top of that. But yes, there's a little bit of we need something on the ground to play with before we can really do anything other than what we've outlined here in terms of making real progress, in my opinion. Which is why I sort of feel like this meeting is sort of a rehash every time of topics of, yep, we would like to look into this, and there's nothing on the ground to look at. So it's hard for technical people to sort of take it beyond that.
Exactly.
So we're in agreement there.
So you're taking the words out of my mouth. So maybe we just create an issue on the NERC architecture, or maybe we create a similar repo as the MOC testbed that Lars created for getting installment scripts for OpenStack on that hardware ready, and then we can pull in PSI folks, Chris Long and folks.
I think Chris also the last time we talked about it, he was trying to clean up some of his scripts so that he could drop them off, but it's one of those things where he gets pulled onto other things as well. Unfortunately.
Exactly, but now we have hardware, so he has scripts, and we can tell him now point your scripts at these IPMI interfaces.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of where we're at right now.
Sorry, you dropped out, Justin.
Yep. I accidentally pressed the button. I'm at the stage now where we have an undercloud deployment. Right, we've pulled in our bare metal node. This is literally where I got pulled off to work on a COVID-19 related project at work. But basically, right, we're at the point where we're defining the network config for the overcloud and trying to do our first deployment of that onto this test gear. So as far as on the ground, actually getting close to some use, that's where we stand now. But like I said, then really another derailing part of that is that, right, there are experts at Red Hat that do large OpenStack installations. And so wanting to hear from those and what the experiences and recommendations and going through that whole workshop and the planning and all of that was something that, right, we feel like we want to do. And we're obviously doing it in parallel, but very interested to hear what comes out of that. And I believe whatever they have behind the scenes there is we're still relying on Triple O, but it seems like there's more scaffolding that they have. So again, just trying to settle on what is the thing to be using. And it seems like
we lost you for part of that.
yeah, my son started singing. So so it seems like they have some other Ansible playbooks and other things and tricks up their sleeves that we really need to get to the bottom of. And then, on the OpenShift side, right, it seems like Mock playing with that in parallel, right? I mean, is that still something you guys are doing, Michael? Has there been any movement on like just playing with an OpenShift on bare metal?
We are, and that's part of what Rob is. So Rob is looking at an OpenShift on bare metal, but in addition to that, Lars is, and I think Lars said earlier that he had just gotten that to work. One other piece that I think ties into some of this is that I think that the consulting guys, part of the reason that they're interested in this is they want those scripts that they're talking about using with you to be pushed into the open community. So I think that's part of what's driving their interest as well. And so I apologize. I'm going to have to jump off because I'm 7 minutes into a different meeting that Naved and I are supposed to be at. Yeah. And we're getting the folks who are normally late to that meeting are nudging us, which is how we know that we've run way over.
Justin.
Okay. Thanks, Michael. Bye.
Thanks very much. Sorry, Alana, what were you going to say?
Yeah, Justin, can you send the link to this workshop that you?
Yeah, so that's what I was just about to say. I don't. Okay. So this is, and again, I think this is more like they're going to show up on well, obviously these days I don't think they're showing up, but usually they would show up on prem and talk with everybody involved at the network layer, people who are going to do the DevOps side of this, and just have a big planning meeting. That being said, there will probably be I'm guessing that will all happen over Zoom.
Justin, I just made you the host so that you guys can continue discussing.
Sure, we can keep chatting. Sure.
And then when you exit, in theory, the recording will go up and I will push it to Zoom or pull it from Zoom and put it on our new YouTube channel.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Bye, guys.
So I'm not, and I'm also not sure, right, because they're having to, right, they're sort of getting sign-offs and things to do this. I'm not sure who's allowed to be involved. I certainly I certainly don't mind at all. So I suppose I'll get back to you on that.
Okay, because I'm learning a lot about the installation, but I'm still didn't do it on my own on bare metal. So if I have anything to look at and learn from it, so it will be great.
For which platform? For OpenStack or either one, OpenShift?
Both, okay, but maybe so OpenShift.
Let me show you. Lars gave us. This is what I'm working with right now, and it's on GitHub. Lars came up with a really nice sort of OpenStack deployment demo. That's more than it's a completely virtualized installation of OpenStack, but it does it as if it's bare metal. So what that means is like he's using things like virtual BMC to pretend like each of the VMs that are running have their own offboard management, right? So they can actually run on IPMI. So it's all done on, you need really large hosts to do it. And it's a set of VMs that run in libvirt, but it's not, the VMs are set up as if they are bare metal and provisioned as if they are bare metal. So the process isn't any different. And that was a really helpful thing to sort of get started. We've sort of moved past that and are just doing a straight up bare metal provision from what we've learned from experimenting with Lars' demo. But let me send you that.
Yeah. So I'm working also with the guys that from this meeting about the CNV, sorry, on the MOC. So yes, right now we got the hardware and we need to start testing and performing the installation on bare metal. So I'm trying to get as much as possible as information as I can, because also Lars also told me that he's been this past few weeks trying to install on bare metal. So that he had a lot of problems with that. So I'm trying to avoid them.
So if you have access to a large, and this is for an OpenStack install. So if it's OpenShift, I don't really have any good pointers there yet. I imagine down the line maybe, but this repo that I just sent you is what Lars sent us. It's essentially a set of Ansible playbooks that drive a standard OOO deployment. And specifically this branch, so I think the master branch relies on actually using Red Hat Enterprise Linux, but this the CentOS 7 train branch, you can actually just use CentOS 7. And basically you have a really large machine that has libvirt on it. And the playbooks will set up libvirt and everything. And basically you need a large enough machine to house all of OpenStack. So it's, you know, you need a VM on that machine for the undercloud, which is its own tiny OpenStack installation. And then you need 3 controller VMs and at least one other hypervisor VM. So basically a VM for each component of OpenStack. And then you use the undercloud VM to deploy OpenStack onto the remaining 4, the 3 controllers and the 1 hypervisor. And that happens all on one box. It's completely local. Same with the networking. It's all set up with Open vSwitch to be completely local. So it is really sort of a completely contained installation. So there's, when it comes to, when you actually break out from this demo and go to a bare metal thing, it's, or a bare metal setup, it's a little different in the sense that you can drop some of the Open vSwitch and libvirt networking that he's using just to mock a real environment. So in the end, we ended up, as I'm progressing through a real bare metal install, I'm sort of just using this repo as inspiration, borrowing some things from the playbooks and whatever, you know, once you sort of get a feel for what's going on there, you just sort of pick and shoot out of there. But that's been really, really helpful. And that's probably the closest thing to something that's, you know, we've actually had our hands on that's tangible, that has worked. We've seen the demo work and run it ourselves, and we're now trying to make a multi-node installation. But yeah, like I said, so beyond this, or beyond the, you know, the standard OOO thing, we're not really aware of you know, what other deployments to be messing with. And so that's where Red Hat coming in and saying, you know, this is how you should go about it is really useful.
Yeah.
All right. Unfortunately, I need to run to another meeting.
Yeah,
but
great. You gave me enough time.
It's a pleasure meeting you. And
thanks a lot. Okay.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I said, if that workshop becomes something that we can share out, I will certainly do that. But I'll have to get back to you.
Sure. Thanks
All
a
right.
lot.
Nice meeting you.
Bye.
Okay. Talk to you later.